Welcome into the Illini Inquirer Podcast. It's Jeremy Werner, joined by Mike LaTulip, our Illini Inquirer basketball analyst. We get to talk about a week that was for Illinois basketball, a loss on the road at Rutgers, and then a win on the road at Minnesota. So a little negative, a little positive, and then a huge home week ahead as Illinois welcomes UCLA and Michigan State, two conference contenders as UCLA has really gotten back in this race, and two jersey raising ceremonies this week as well for Illinois basketball. So, Mike, it's been a while. Good to see you, man. We've missed you, I think, for the last week and a half due to vacation and an illness here, but good to have you back, man.
Universal Studios and then sickness on my way back from Universal Studios. So it's not often you get a Universal Studios trip in the middle of the season, but we found a way to pull it off this
Best
year.
Ride? Best ride? What'd you get?
So I actually made our so I went with my wife and her parents, so my in-laws. And when we got done on our last day, I had everybody make their pyramid of rides because I was just curious. Talking point,
wooden pyramid of success.
Yeah. So the top of my pyramid was the Velocicoaster. It's a newer Jurassic Park one.
Yeah,
unbelievable. They all like the Hagrid motorbike. Well, I mean, for people listening that have been to Universal to understand, for people that don't,
is that a Harry Potter reference? My wife went there. I've not partaken in the Harry Potter experience.
Yep. And I'm not a Harry Potter guy per se, but I can appreciate the effort that went into putting together that Harry Potter world. It's insane.
Yeah, that came out right after I was in that age range. Like you were right in the middle of that Harry Potter age range. Yeah.
Yeah. I convinced myself I didn't have time to read those books. So I think we watched like a 20-minute YouTube video before I went to Universal the first time. And I was like, yeah, I got it.
There you go.
I'm all set.
Just in this thing. All right. Well, good to have you back, Mike. And it's probably best we got this one after the weekend, after a feel-good win. Because it wasn't feel good after that Rutgers loss, which obviously was disappointing. Rutgers, Dylan Harper, when he's healthy, they're a different kind of animal. But what do you kind of make of the week that was on the road for Illinois?
Stop playing weekday games. That seems to be the theme the last month or so. But no, I think, when you look at these two different games and when you play on the road specifically, you have to do a few different things. You have to play smart. You got to rebound. You got to make shots, and you got to take care of the ball. You got to do, and sometimes you won't do all four, but three of them can win you the game. And I thought in that Rutgers game, and I know they won the rebounding battle, but relative to how Illinois rebounds the basketball, I thought you kind of lost in all four of those categories, which is just going to make it, and you made it close there for a second, but it's going to make it really difficult to win on the road when you do that. And for a team like Rutgers that is one of the worst teams to play because they're in like desperation mode while also having two potential top 5 draft picks. I mean, it's kind of hard to fathom. And I've called them metric killers and that they probably would be metric killers as the season went on. But then you flip to the Minnesota game and all those categories that I listed, I thought you checked every box. And that's what that looks like. And we'll get into why, but that was the difference in those two games was just the intellect, the rebounding, I thought the attention to detail, the toughness, the taking care of the ball. I mean, you stark contrast between those two games for sure.
Mike, since the last time we talked to you, which was about 2 weeks ago, Will Riley's gone on an absolute tear. We've seen flashes of this from Will Riley throughout the season, but consistently now, last 4 games, 21.2 points on 52% shooting, 4.8 assists during that stretch, 3.8 rebounds. What has led to this for Will Riley to kind of make this breakthrough?
Well, he's special. And I thought I saw a stat maybe yesterday that the men's basketball account put out. His stat line hadn't been done for a freshman in like 30 years.
At least 30 years. I think that's as far back.
They just went. That's just as far as they could go back. Yeah, I mean that just doesn't just happen to anybody. I mean that happens to a really special player. And freshmen are always going to have peaks and valleys. And for him, when usage and volume is unpredictable, guys can struggle with that, especially guys that played at the level he's played at in prep and AU, leading up to this point. So that's the human side of it, where you have to deal with that and find a way to deal with that, find a way to continue to make an impact. And luckily for him, still being a 2-to-1 assist to turnover guy, despite, getting spot minutes here and there, still, being really sure with the ball, obviously wasn't making shots for, a good portion of that middle of the season, but has come out of it once he's, I think played himself back into real minutes. And you always sit there and you wonder, right? Like for a player, is it, am I struggling because I'm not playing, or am I not playing because I'm struggling?
Mm-hmm.
And it's always a hard thing, I think, to try to balance in the mind of a player. But you can see when he's given, I don't want to say like the keys, but a couple keys, a key to do some things in that offense and to play through mistakes. It's unlocked, I think, what we saw glimpses of in the beginning of the season. And for this team to hit their ceiling, we talk about ceiling constantly, him being a real focal point at 6'8", handling the ball, really good decision maker on top of it. I mean, a guy that you feel comfortable with when the ball is in his hands, like that's massive. And his takeover ability that we've seen in these games, particularly in that second half against Minnesota, seeking out matchups, looking at Dawson Garcia, who's, 5 years older than him, and just going straight through his chest for a guy that's 195 pounds is I think shows you the mental makeup of a kid like that. And man, it's happening at the right time.
I know there's a push among the fan base to start Will O'Reilly. He's playing starters minutes, so I don't really care about that. He's averaging about 30 minutes per game over the last 5. But what has struck to me, Mike, is just his comfort, his strength, and his confidence to handle defensive pressure, his focus on taking it to the rack and being able to finish at the rim. Those are big changes. And then obviously his playmaking, right? Like, it looks like a point guard out there at times. What's that a sign of for you? All those things.
I've always talked about confidence and shake and athleticism being tied together. And he got some of that back. And he's a really tough cover because he's unorthodox to guard, because he has this very innate ability to feel physicality and just spin off of it. And we saw that multiple times in the Minnesota game, where he gets into your body and then you feel like you have the physical advantage over him. So the second you try to be more physical with him, that's his cue to just kind of pull the chair on you as the defender, spin off, make a play, finish off the glass. He's finishing it at a much higher rate, even from 2. We talk about knocking down threes, but like his intermediate and floaters and finishing around the rim like that, his ability to do that opens up, the 3-point shooting for him, and he gets to the line a little bit more, and that kind of settles you in. So it's a mix of things, and it's kind of what you expect from a guy that is that talented offensively. I mean, it's very, very rare for a guy at that age to be as advanced as he is offensively. And the personnel that they put on the floor, we'll get into that here in a second, but everything becomes much more free flowing. He's not a ball stopper. He makes reads. I mean, he got his shot blocked yesterday, or in the Minnesota game. And when that ball came back down to him, just out of his peripheral, saw Jake underneath the basket and just quick hitter layup. I mean, it's that type of stuff where for other guys, it takes a second to like get your shot block, gather. Okay, now scan. Oh, Jake's open. And by the time you don't have that if you don't have that instinctually, the windows close.
Yeah.
And he's got that instinctually, which just makes it all the more impressive.
It was kind of a mixed bag this week for Kasparas, Jakucionis, but that was an improvement, right? Like, he had been in a real slump there. Finally busts out of that at Minnesota, 24 points. At one point, he was just carrying this Illinois offense early to kind of build that 20-point lead. What was different on Saturday as opposed to Wednesday and several of the games before that?
His mentality. That's it. I could stop talking right now, but I mean, just that is, when you see him, it's never physical with him. Like he's got size. He's 6'6", 205, and he's got all the talent in the world, and he's so smart. And part of it for some of these guys is just, hey, simplify things and just get out of your own way. And I thought he was getting in his own way for probably the last month or so. And part of it too, like when you're not knocking down shots, and that can have a ripple effect on your game, especially for a young kid. And so again, like we can look at Will Riley and Kasparas as NBA draft picks, which Kasparas will be. We'll obviously see what happens with Will. He's ascending in that direction, that's for sure. But every freshman goes through these types of struggles. They do, and it's just a matter of how quickly you pull yourself out of it. It's going to happen. I mean, Dylan Harper's had these games. Ace Bailey's had these games, and so it's been great. It was great to see Will and Kasparas cross paths on the same night. Right? Yeah. That feels like something that hasn't really happened throughout the course of the season. But I don't have any doubts that this is going to be something. This is going to be the norm for Kasparas again, and that what we saw the last 2-3 weeks before that was more of just kind of like a blip on the radar, because he's so good, man. And you see it too, like when he's got it clicking and what they can do offensively. I know they had so much free flowing action that it wasn't like, I don't think they intentionally put him off the ball. It was just more like balls in Will's hands a little more, balls in Kylan's hands a little bit more. And there's just more of a natural flow where I don't think he has to shoulder that entire load. And I thought it was one of his more complete games of the season the other night.
For sure. And we know about the analytics of Illinois' approach, and it makes sense when you are making a lot of threes, but it just got to the point where analytically it didn't make sense to shoot this many threes when you're one of the worst three-pointing shooting teams in the country. Well, they shoot a season low 16 against Minnesota. They make 9 of them, Mike. It took them 40 to make that before. Is this just a game against a bad Minnesota defense that was there, or was this something to build on as an approach for Illinois?
Probably a little bit of both. I think they had a clear advantage in the paint. Mm-hmm. Minnesota didn't do themselves many favors. I'll show it on the film. Like, their communication was horrible when they got spread out, when Illinois went 5 out and the paint was open all night. So they took advantage of that. They took advantage of what the game gave them. Now, make no mistake about it. Like, I don't think Brad and Tyler and those guys stood in front of the whiteboard before the game and they're like, we're shooting less threes tonight, guys. That's just, if you're in a locker room like that, that's just not really what goes on. I think it's just more so, hey, with your starting lineup and with your personnel, like, the adjustment wasn't shooting less threes. The adjustment was who was on the floor. Mm-hmm. And that allowed you to get more pace and space and cutting and guys freed up in the paint for layups. I mean, that's how that ended up happening. And then, the quality of threes that you got were good quality threes, because when they try to overcorrect to help out in the paint, now it's more inside out, catch and shoot. It's Tomislav setting a flare screen for Ben Humrikas and slipping and bringing 2 with him. I mean, it was as complete of an offensive showing as I think they've had from just like a toolbox, from like a full array of things that they could throw at you. It wasn't just high ball screen or like away actions up top. It was everything. I mean, it was transition. It was secondary transition. It was 5 out, space you out. There were set actions in there. There were high ball screens, and there were horn sets. There was such a variety that I thought it just made it really tough to cover. But the reason why all that worked was because of the personnel. Like, you had less, I don't want to call it like ball stoppers on the floor, but you had you really played 7 guys.
Yeah.
And those 7 guys, I think you could all say like, hey, those are 7 guys that you look at and you're like, when you get out there in free flowing offense, they can read and react.
I want to bring up Tommy because he was so good and he's proving to be really tough here. But you mentioned, I mean, Ben in the starting lineup is a 3-man next to Merez and next to Tommy. And then you had Kylan and, KJ in this game. Obviously, Dre was sick. Trey has been sick for a while. Only played like 12, 15 seconds in this game and got the 2 fouls. What did you make of that? Like, what did that do for that lineup?
Well, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago when we talked about the Merez and Tommy lineup. I'd said it on a podcast. I said, Ben can play with these guys. You can go really with a 3 big lineup, because Tommy's ability to step out and shoot, still gives you 4 shooters on the floor around one guy that's, not a spacer. But I've always said there's a lot of value in having a non-spacer out there if he's a good screener and if he's big, and Merez is that, and he rebounds at a high level. So I think part of it is looking and saying, well, when we start this game, we're going to dominate the glass.
Yeah.
Like we have a lineup out there that's going to dominate the glass. It's like almost in football. It's like, let's get our run game going. Let's kind of settle us into this game. And
that's how I felt, Mike, going in. When I saw that lineup, I said, this is Brad saying, if we're going to do anything, it's going to be a rebound. We're going to dominate the glass.
Yeah. You don't give second chance opportunities. And the really cool thing I thought was Minnesota hit 3 threes to start that game. So you could have very easily been like, yeah, we got to start keeping pace, and we got to chuck ourselves. And they just stuck with the plan, continue to space, find crevices, cut to the basket. And there are a few different. You see just Tommy's importance in general with that lineup out there. When you get two shooters in the corners, and you have Tommy come off of a pick and pop to the top of the key. Kylan's such a good cutter on the opposite wing that if Tommy picks and pops to the top, that guy who's in the next ball side gap kind of has to stunt over to Tommy because you want to give him an open three. And like the second he has that indecision, Kylan's back cutting. So Tommy was able to catch it and hit Kylan on just a quick pass for, he was able to gather himself and get fouled and shoot two. But you just can see how it all works when that personnel grouping's on the floor. And then you bring Will in, and maybe that's for Merez. And just like the minutes are going to get shuffled around. And that's not unique to this team. That's happened with Brad Underwood teams. I mean, just take last year, for example. I mean, every game is going to call for something different. I mean, Merez only ended up playing 14 minutes, didn't he, the other night?
Yeah.
I mean, you went with Will.
Great game for him either.
Yeah, you went with Will. You spaced out. I mean, like think about Justin Harmon last year. Minutes went down at the end of the year, right? You start like when it gets February and March, it's like, yeah, I know we have 9. I know we have 10 maybe, but like who are my 7? Who are my 6 probably in some games? And you look back at like the Big Ten tournament last year, and Dane Danger practically wins you the Ohio State game in the opener and then turns around and against Nebraska in the second round just because up tempo, 5 out, Dane Danger plays 6 minutes. Luke Goody in that Ohio State game played 9 minutes. Like it's just, and he had 2 games in the Big Ten tournament where he played under 10. I mean, this is just, it's going to happen for some of these guys who aren't, probably that starting 5 and Will Riley. I mean, outside of that, it's like your minutes probably aren't guaranteed past those 6, depending on the game and how you want to play. So I really like that lineup because I do think it gives you so much size and versatility and shooting. I mean, like Kylan hasn't shot it well this year, but like I think they still kind of honor him as a shooter, and he's doing such a good job too of when they're running like his attacking to the basket. Last game, I thought he made it really a point to when they threw it to him on the back action. So when somebody's coming off a ball screen, going to the basket, Merez rolls, the guy in that ball side corner, Kylan, circles up to the wing, right? So when he circled up to the wing, his man is deciding whether to go with Kylan or I got to tag Merez on the roll. And Kylan's like, hey, if you show any tag at all to Merez, when that ball's thrown back to me, I'm driving your feet and getting downhill, getting into the paint. Like it's just such a smart way to go about it because you're driving off of movement instead of driving off of like, hey, we got 5 guys planted in the gap. Let me try to get downhill. So there was just a lot there. Again, I'll talk about in the film, but this lineup was great. The personnel was great. I thought it fit. I thought it blended, and you just got to see game to game. That's one game, right? Can you repeat it for another game?
Yeah, I think the role identification continues, right? And it'll be interesting where Trey fits in with that. But I think Ben is finding it. I think Kylan is finding it, that it's a supporting role now, but those guys are finding a little bit. Ben with the booty ball, it's looking better, Mike. Kylan looks like a halfback out there, just plowing his way to the rim. So that's what I want to watch because it's clear your path to your highest ceiling is with KJ and Will Riley as your main playmakers, with Tommy healthy, right? And he is gutting it out. But then it's going to be interesting how those other pieces kind of fit into what they're doing. I'm encouraged by Ben and Kylan. I'm interested to see the rest of the team. And Jake is doing his thing. Like he's a guy that's comfortable playing 18 minutes in a game or playing 5. But it will
look,
be
Jeremy, let me ask you this, right? So you have your top 6, obviously.
Yeah.
Out of Jake Davis, Dre Gibbs-Lawhorn, Trey White, I mean, it's pretty much it. I mean, I won't throw Carey in there. Like if you look down the bench, like who out of those 3, who do you trust the most?
Jake. Like
Yeah.
who I trust in to go in there and not stop the ball or things like that. I mean, Dre has had a really good season, right? And
He has.
if you need energy, if you need somebody to just be like, go score. But now you're starting to see Will Riley take that role a little bit, right? So him and Dre and Trey, I'm interested over the next month to see how they kind of settle in.
Yeah, and I'll be curious too, because it's really hard, right? You think about as players like Dre, you're probably thinking a week ago? You're like, I kind of broke through, man. I'm in the starting lineup, and then again, like you have Will who breaks out, and Kylan who went to the bench, comes back in, kind of gets his head on straight again. Yeah, I mean we saw it again. Like Dane last year has a really good game in Ohio State, like I mentioned, and then really doesn't play the next game. It's like, how do you keep the main thing, which is getting this team into March, getting into the tournament, winning tournament games, going far, going to an Elite Eight, trying to reach a Final Four. Like that's got to be the main thought process for all these guys on this team. But it's much easier said than done. So that's those are things that you're managing down the stretch for sure.
I'm thinking of this, Mike. We keep talking about Tomislav Ivisic's value to the team. When they've had him like fully healthy for a game, or not fully healthy for a game, you think of Michigan State, he was sick. Maryland, he's out. Nebraska, he's out. Rutgers leaves midway through. That's 4 losses right there out of your 8 losses.
He's pretty important. I mean, you look at him, the Maryland game was an eye opener just from a defensive standpoint. Go figure, it helps to just be 7-1. But even against Minnesota, I mean, again, he gets a couple, he won't get credited with the steals, but drop coverage, his hands and his anticipation, getting his hands on in passing lanes and knocking balls loose. And then offensively, his passing has hit a level that I watched a lot of his film in the offseason, and I was like, yeah, he's a really capable passer. Like he's a really good passer, and he's found a rhythm up top and understands, like, if I, again, off those pick and pops, like I know that guy who's in the next to the ball wing is going to have to dive. And if we got shooters on the weak side, those guys aren't hugged in towards the basket. And that all comes down to personnel too. So they're just going to continue to get into a flow. And like the offense has matured from what it was early in the year. And that always happens with teams and just guys get to know each other and playing with each other. But he's as big of a part of this as anybody. When we talk about the 2 potential draft picks, I mean, he in terms of like really a fulcrum and a pillar of what they want to do on both ends. I mean, he's a big key.
All right. Are we going to look back on this, Mike? 5 losses in 8 games as a subpar stretch because of injury and illness, a young team learning, a mixture of both? What do you think?
Mixture of both. I think being shorthanded for anybody in college basketball. I mean, you look at Janai Broome went out for Auburn, and Auburn just went and won their next 2 games. It's an older team. This team, if this team had absences, they were going to feel it because they're young, they're inexperienced. I mean, you got a few guys on there that have obviously played some college minutes, but I thought after the Oregon game, I think everybody recognizes the ceiling of this team because, I mean, even think about offensively, they were averaging like 85 points a game and they couldn't make a shot.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you imagine if they just like made shots. But after that Oregon game, I was actually kind of surprised how quickly they got vaulted into a category that I think was probably a little too far for where they were at right now, at that time. Like they still needed to grow as a team. And so I think what they were fighting was like, we're still young. we're still going to have peaks and valleys, because then the fan base's expectations, like you start talking about, I mean, Jordan Taylor was on the broadcast in that Northwestern game. Like, I don't know, I'd take this team over the Flying Illini. You know, like it's hard to, like, I felt like the team got like tense a little bit because you're managing the expectations while you're trying to grow and develop as a team. And then on top of that, everybody's looking at you like, oh, wait, they're talking Final Four title contender. We're going to give you everything we got. And so like you're dealing with that every game on top of what we talked about with guys being out and injuries. Because when you look at like the schedule and when March comes around, and teams know this, like when Michigan State wins and beats you at Michigan State, like the selection committee isn't sitting there in March going like, hey, wasn't that the one where Kasparas fouled out? They just, it's a win against Illinois. And teams know that when they go into it. They don't care that you have a man down. They don't care. They want to get the win against Illinois. And so that's a lot to carry for a team that's young.
I think you are a marquee win for all of those teams, right?
For all those teams. And so obviously they're dealing with that. And I thought, it's not the worst thing to go off the radar a little bit and then kind of come back to where they're at now, where I think they found some personnel groupings they like. I shouldn't say they like, it's like, most efficient, I think, personnel groupings that allows them to do what they want to do on both ends. And then it coincides with, you got a lot of really good players who weren't playing well. And now they're playing well, after this last game. And you hope that they can bring that confidence and production into the subsequent games. So yeah, I mean, it's a mixture of things. It's never black and white. And you always gotta factor in that, like, these players are human and they're all going through things for the first time. A lot of them, at this, not only in college basketball, in America for some of them. Yeah. So it's just, we can talk about ceiling all day, and you're never guaranteed to reach it. We talked about that with the 22-23 team. They beat UCLA, they beat Texas, and I was sitting here after the game like, ceiling's great. We can talk about ceiling all day. We can talk about metrics all day. Well, they're 14 in KenPom. It's like, yeah, I mean, KenPom's looking at what they've done and saying, well, this is what you're capable of. That doesn't mean you're going to reach it. So I think they got the right makeup for this team. Like even for having younger guys, like having guys that I think really want to embrace the challenge and understand, like, okay, you know what? This is big time college basketball. And when expectations are on you, like you gotta go out there and be the aggressor. So there's a learning lesson, I think, for a lot of them. I'm excited to see where they go with it from here.
I don't want to keep it too long, Mike, but like that's what I talked to Underwood about after this Minnesota game was he went the one and done route, right? When these get old, stay old mantra for him, but he saw UConn, he goes, I want some of that. And he's able to get it at this point of his career. It's the first time he's been able to go out and get that type of talent. But he had to teach himself, like, I have to maybe show them some grace that they haven't been through this. This team hasn't been through this. They have to go through these things. But can you come out the other end better and not fold in the face of all that adversity? And they were wavering there for a little bit, and we'll see if they can get out of it with this week. But the hope is the ceiling is reached at some point, and you have enough consistency to make that run in the tournament. Because you think about some of these teams that Kentucky last year had 2 lottery picks, right? And they lose in the first round. Baylor had a couple first round draft picks, losing the second round. But then you have Duke, who has a couple high draft picks, ends up getting to the Elite Eight. So it'll be really interesting to see how this all goes. I still think this is a team that has to prove consistency, but it does have a high ceiling. And the next month will be pretty telling of how we feel about them going in the tournament.
Well, I think over the years too, with the teams that Brad and the staff have constructed, even your young guys, I mean, you've had to deal with having young guys, young talented guys really play through struggles. And the way the teams have been constructed over the last few years is like, you have young guys, and when they struggle, it's like, well, just put the old guy in. Yeah. There's always been kind of the, hey, we need to win games, so we're going to go with the older guy. And now there's not as much of that. Like you're going to have to kind of take it on the chin because even prior to the season, I talked about it. I said, I'm looking at the makeup of this roster. I see a lot of young guys, and I see like I don't care how talented they are. There are going to be some roller coaster elements to the season. Get ready. I talked about with Kasparas. I said, hey, he's going to turn the ball over.
Yep.
Get ready. Like we talked about this before the season, and so expectations changed, and they changed quickly. But I think I think they're about where they probably should be. Maybe with like a couple more wins, but I don't know, man. I mean, there's also, you look at like the rest of the schedule here, and you had a really good game against Minnesota, and it gets real now. Like it gets real now. So I think you could look at that one of two ways, right? You can look at that as like real opportunity for this team to like over the course of the next, what is it, February 10th right now? 2 weeks. The next 2 weeks, you got UCLA, Michigan State, Wisconsin, and Duke.
4 quad one games.
Really high quad one games at that. And I mean, you got a really, really big chance here to like turn some heads again and turn some heads at the right time. We're almost to March, and you should have like a real collective confidence as a team, something that I think they lost for a little bit there, that they watching this Minnesota game. And I honestly don't care that it's Minnesota, to be honest, because when you are a shooter or when you're a, football player, whatever it may be, like even when you play against what you would call like lesser competition, seeing the ball go through the basket, running really good offense, playing good defense, it gives you confidence. Like my teammates, and when I played and stuff, like when you played in a game and made shots, you didn't like walk out of the game, get on the bus and be like, well, it was against them, so I don't feel as good now that I did that. No, you're getting on the bus, you're like, man, yeah, I can shoot the shit out of the ball.
Right.
I'm going to do it next game. And so I don't care who it's against. Like can you imagine if they played poorly against Minnesota or dropped that game, and then now we're looking at the schedule? Like this is exactly where you'd want to be coming into this stretch. You just need to string some consistency together.
All right, Illinois drops out of the AP top 25. Deserved. They are number 28 this week. UCLA right outside of that. I think they've had 6 straight wins. They are 26th, right ahead of, right behind Maryland on that one. So Illinois now maybe the target off its back, maybe the chip back on its shoulder. Brad Underwood can show them that. But huge week, as you said, at home, Mike. UCLA matchup, Kofi Coburn night, Jersey going to the rafters. Michigan State on Saturday on Fox. Great opportunity for you. What does this week mean, and what do you think of these matchups?
It's a massive week. I mean, I think the UCLA game is going to be really interesting because, I mean, this is a team that forces the most turnovers percentage-wise in America. And so your young team playing at home, somewhere where, it hasn't been great at home this year. Let's just be honest. So protecting home floor, not letting UCLA, quiet that crowd by giving them runouts, giving them opportunities to get easy looks in transition, because they're not the best team in the half court. That's where you want to keep UCLA. Keep them in the half court. Make them shoot over the top of you. Don't give them anything easy. They're an okay shooting team, but like really where they've been really good in this stretch of wins that they've had is with that turnover margin. Like their turnover margin's been probably the best in the country. And if we know anything about Illinois, like their defense is not set up to force turnovers. So you're really going to have to take care of the ball in this game against UCLA. And then Michigan State, I mean, it should be the same for both games, but especially in that game, man. I mean, this feels like kind of Iowa-ish, like it was in the early 2020s. I mean, this feels like all the talk that went on after that game, and if you're Kasparas, I mean, this got to be one where you're like licking your chops to go and get one and knock them off. Because now we'll see what happens with Fears and Booker. I know they were out, but you better, I want to say you better hope Fears comes back, because the more that Jason Richardson gets opportunity, it becomes even scarier because of how talented he is. But accept the challenge and be ready for a dogfight in both these games. Because I think Your ability to take care of the ball is going to be tested in both of these games, but your toughness is going to be tested in both of these games too. So you got to be ready to bring it. And if you don't, like this is, if you're not tough for these two games, it's going to be an 0-2 week. If you are, you're going to give yourself a chance to get two really quality wins.
All right, Mike, before I let you go, we did the Big Ten coaching tier rankings, like the best openings or best jobs in the Big Ten last year.
Yep.
And that was a fun exercise. So I want to ask you now, with the Indiana job actually opening up, they're on pace to miss their 5th NCAA tournament of the last 7. And it's just insane, given the resources that are there, given the history that is there. But outside of a few Big Ten titles under, Tom Crean, it has not been a top tier production program here for a while. So how do you kind of stack up this Indiana job in the Big Ten and in the country?
It's still a really good job. I mean, that goes without saying. I think it's one of the best jobs in the conference. And I'm just really, really curious to see what direction they go in. You tried to keep it in the family. I'm not sure how much that's worked for, just look across college basketball. I mean, Hubert Davis, it's not looking good for him right now. And, we've seen, Penny Hardaway's kind of turned things around, but I think you need a disruptor there. I think you got to stop with like the CEO politician type of hire. You need a guy that's like willing to come in, ruffle some feathers. I mean, the fact that they keep going after, it's not, and like Mike Woodson's not like an altar boy. Like that's not really like what I'm getting at. But like your program was built on Bob Knight. And I get like you could sit there and say like we're in a different era, all these things, but like go get a guy that is willing to disrupt and kind of go against the status quo. I mean, like for me, a guy like Will Wade would be awesome there. But it sounds like he's probably going to take a job further south. But Chris Beard, I mean, like any of those guys that are just kind of, I'll call it renegades, but just guys that are willing to kind of flip that thing upside down. I don't think Scott Drew would be a good fit there. Like I think Brad Stevens is an unbelievable coach, but like he's been out of it for a little while, and he's the GM of the freaking Celtics.
Why would you leave the Boston freaking?
Yeah, like it's
basketball. I don't see Scott Drew leaving Indiana when he turned down Kentucky, which I think is a better job. So yeah, like Chris Beard, if you're fine with that other stuff, he's going to win games. He's a really, really good coach. And then I just think they need a good ball coach, Mike. Like go find somebody that can build a roster that makes sense and coach it. Like, it doesn't have to be the biggest name in the world.
You know who's a really under the radar name that I have? And I'll say this name, and there's probably a lot of listeners who'll be like, I have no idea who that is. But there's a guy who's a part of the Nate Oates tree. He was an assistant in Alabama. He's at Arkansas State right now by the name of Brian Hodgson. And that dude can flat out coach. And he's kind of similar to a Chris Beard, kind of similar to like that type of mentality, but a really good ball coach, X's and O's on top of being like a top tier motivator. I mean, he's a guy that like, he's going to get a high major job in the next few years. And like, it would be a hire that people would be scratching their heads, but think about all the hires that, people may have looked at as home runs at the time that didn't work out. I mean, I think about the same thing. Yeah. I mean, I think about the same thing with like trades in the NBA. I mean, trades, hires, they're all the same thing to me. It's like, I don't care. Like the actual hire doesn't matter. The actual trade doesn't matter. Just what happens after.
Yeah.
That's it. And so like when TJ Otzelberger gets hired at Iowa State, I mean, I know he was an assistant there for a long time, but he was at UNLV, like 500 in his couple seasons there. And if you look at it, there were definitely Iowa State fans that were like, oh, we should have gotten this guy, this higher profile name or this. And then he goes there and wins at a really, really high level. So it's not always the guys that you think are at the top of the list. So I'll be curious to see that there's going to be guys with interest in that job for sure.
Well, and if you're Scott Dolson, the AD at Indiana, look what you just did with Kurt Signetti.
Yeah.
Right. So like, that's why like a Ben McCollum out of Drake, I wouldn't overlook, right? Just because I can coach basketball. So, and with those resources, you should be able to get a roster. It's just, you got to get a roster that makes sense.
I agree.
All right. Before I let you go, NBA trade deadline was insane.
Yeah, it was.
Luka Doncic, somebody actually traded him, Mike.
I was on the field of 68 live when that trade happened. and I have the video. It's hysterical. Like I'm looking at my phone because I get the Shams alert. So I look at my phone and then I kind of look back and I look down at it again. I was like, that says Luka. And Douster was asking me a question. I didn't know he was asking me a question. I wasn't paying attention at all. And then I looked up and I was like, hey, Luka Doncic just got traded for Anthony Davis. And Douster and Goodman were both on there. They were like, what? So it was just between that and, I'm a Warriors guy. So getting Jimmy Butler, they need to do something. So I'm glad they did something to not waste away Steph's remaining years. Didn't look great to start in the Bulls game, but looked great as the game went on. Not to throw a deep cut at you.
It's good for us because at least we picked a decision with one trade. I would have liked 2 more trades on top of that.
The Bulls are a whole different story, man.
At least we made one move, but good Lord. It's bad. We need some lottery luck, Mike.
You do.
Modest might be good. I like playing him more and losing more.
Yeah. Lose a little bit more, get a higher draft. I mean, this is the draft to be a higher draft pick, man.
That's right.
It's a higher draft.
Mike LaTulip, you're the goods, man. We'll do the film room, so be on the lookout for that as well on our YouTube channel. Mike, we'll talk to you next week after a huge week for Illinois basketball.
Appreciate it, man.